Coastal Science Center, St. Pete.
Hi, Lisa Quinn, District 7 Environmental Specialist.
Melissa Joyner, District 7 Liaison.
Good morning, Sheila Schneider, Pinellas County Air Quality Division Manager.
Aaron Struzari, Pinellas County Ecological Services.
Tessa Clock with the Environmental Protection Commission Wetlands Division.
Frank Kokenauer, Senior Engineer, Plant City Engineering Department.
Chris Cooley, Director of Environmental Affairs for Port Tampa Bay.
Steve Gorman, Pasco Metropolitan Executive Director.
Good morning. I am Scott Berry, and I'm a Principal Transportation Planner with the Pasco County MPO.
And Caitlin, can you read aloud just the names of the attendees we have online?
Yes, of course.
We have Alexander Lawad, Christy Booth, Cheryl Stacks, Cassie Cordova, Ross Dickerson, Laura DiGritolo. Sorry if I'm butchering any of your names. Gina Torres, Jeff Sims, Arian Martins, Melissa Mulvaney, Alexandra Ryman, Emanetta Somerville, Katie White, Melody Yin, and Juan Lee.
Thank you. And just some housekeeping, there are some bottled waters at the back if you get thirsty, or there's a refill station out the back door, and then restrooms are right behind you and to your right. Right, so what we're gonna do is we have a pretty short presentation to just kind of give you an overview of what the heck you're doing here, and what what we're looking for from you today. And then we're gonna literally just break out pretty quickly into looking at different maps around the different stations. We have Hillsborough over here, Pinellas, Pasco, and Citrus Hernando will be in the back corner. Oh, of course it worked that time. There. Too many. All right. So who we are and what we do. Some of you may or may not be familiar with us. We are Metropolitan Planning Organizations, or MPOs. MPOs are designated by the federal government. So we're also governed under state statute as well as federal law. And really what the role of MPOs is to come up with future transportation projects for all modes of transportation, bike ped, transit, roadways. And then we prioritize those projects for state and federal funding. And then we kind of hand them off to the implementing agencies like the counties or the cities or the state to get built. We are required by law to consider the environment, tourism, safety, security, housing. You can see all of them up there in the bullet point when we come up with these projects. And there's a real big focus on collaboration. We are not an implementing agency. We do not build, operate, or maintain anything as MPOs, but we kind of hold the purse strings when it comes to state and federal transportation dollars. So why you're here today is because when we come up with these crazy ideas for new transportation projects, we are required to, like we had said, consider the possible environmental impacts of those projects. This is not ETDM. This is not the formal review process when a project is going through design. What we want to talk to you about today is some of the ideas we have for future projects to kind of get like a first blush, what are the red flags? What should we be looking for when it comes to these projects? And what are the broad needs for environmental mitigation when it comes to implementing these projects? There's also going to be an opportunity for online feedback after today if we do have a website up. So
because I think they change it. It's my brother.
If you're online, if you could please mute yourself. Caitlin, can you mute her?
Yes.
All right. Sorry about that. There will be an opportunity for online feedback afterwards as well.
If you guys are talking, we can't hear you anymore. You're muted.
Problem solved. Okay. I think you muted the room too. That's all right. So as projects advance for funding, they have to remain consistent with what is in the long-range transportation plan. So as we're putting together our projects now, if we identify even like a cost estimate that says, hey, there's something environmental that should be considered moving forward, As that project moves forward, all the review agencies will know to take a close look at that project and to consider that. So that's why we try to engage our environmental permitting partners early in the process, just to identify, like we said, those red flags. There are a lot of requirements on MPOs and long-range plans. So some of the federal highway requirements are shown on the screen in front of you. We have to include a discussion of the types of environmental mitigation strategies and potential areas to implement them. We have to make sure that our plans are developed in consultation with all the agencies that are listed up here. 10 years ago, what at least I used to do, and I'm sure the other MPOs in the room, we would come out, we would sit down with each and every single one of you individually. And it took a lot of time to do that. So that's why we started doing these kind of region-wide meetings so that we could bring everyone to one place at one time and save us all a lot of time in meetings. The work that we do is required to be performed at a system-wide level. So when you go around and you see some of the maps of the needs projects, don't get too hung up on, okay, well, does this roadway project end here or a mile down the road? Because that could have different impacts. We don't really need to get into that level of detail. More overall, you know, when we look at watersheds, are any of the watersheds, maybe the what do you call it? The mitigation banks are spent in one watershed, but not in another. So things like that we should be considering is what we're really looking for. And when you see the maps, one of them is going to be labeled the needs plan. And that's what we had identified, what I had said earlier is what we think we need for mobility improvements between now and 2050. It does not mean that these projects will get built exactly as they are. It does not mean that we will even have the funding to do the projects that you see on the map. This is just what we're identifying as the needs. All right, so that was just kind of an overall background. And we really want to open it up for some discussion with you before we break out into the individual tables. You can see all of the questions that we have up here on the screen. We don't have to go in order. We don't have to necessarily touch on every single one of these, but we wanted to open it up and have an interactive conversation with you about overall environmental mitigation strategies. So can anyone start us off with what policies, programs, or activities your agency undertakes to mitigate development impacts? Not all at once. Okay, thank you.
So the Tampa Bay Estuary Program for the entire Tampa Bay watershed, which includes parts of all of the counties here except for Citrus and Hernando, we have a habitat master plan, and that basically looks at the entire watershed and identifies those opportunities within the watershed for potential restoration activities. And it also has specific policies that are directed towards making sure that mitigation banking and required compensatory mitigation is also helping to implement the goals that are identified in that habitat master plan. The habitat master plan is something that as partners to the Tampa Bay Estuary Program, you all have committed to helping to implement those goals as well. We also manage a thing called the Tampa Bay Nitrogen Management Consortium, and those are basically representing the commitments we've all made to hold the line on nitrogen pollution. The number 2 source of nitrogen pollution is atmospheric deposition, most of which is coming from mobile sources, so from automobile transit. So there's a number of opportunities for projects that go through the Tampa Bay Nitrogen Management Consortium that are probably relevant to the interests of this group here today.
And when you say projects that go through the consortium, what kind of projects are those?
So it could be anything from a stormwater improvement plan, a wastewater infrastructure upgrade. It could also be things like research. We don't currently have an NADP site here within the watershed. So that's a national air quality monitoring site. So right now we rely on data from the Verna wellfield down in Sarasota County. It'd be great to have an air quality monitoring station that's looking at things, including NOx within the watershed. So it can look in all sorts of different ways. These projects are all voluntary. And so we just sort of sum them all together and use it to document the extent to which we're offsetting growth with nitrogen reduction projects.
So do you take the numbers what do you do with the numbers that you take from the Sarasota area to kind of apply them or extrapolate them to the Tampa Bay area?
There's some like general equations that are used to estimate the overall portion of air pollution based on like the quality of air that's monitored there. And then that's how we estimate the nitrogen load that's coming from the overall airshed and then is contributing and through both wet and dry deposition back to the bay.
So would you say that that's maybe like an untapped opportunity for the areas to have a NOx monitoring?
High
site?
priority.
High priority.
Mhm.
Anyone else? Yes.
So we have our bus fleet electrification plan to replace all of our current diesel gasoline buses over to electric or hybrid. Currently, we have about 62 that we're looking to come in thanks to the VW settlement funds. And we are still seeking our low-no applications. Hopefully, fingers crossed for July, if we get in the next round of funding for that. And then I know for our Clearwater Transit Center, we're seeking LEED certification once that comes online.
You said you have 62 of your fleet are currently electric, or they're about to be electric based on?
About to be electric.
Okay.
Right.
And what's the total size of your fleet?
I have that right here. Anticipated that.
Sorry. I've got loads of questions.
So currently, we have 215 heavy buses with an average age of 10 years, specifically 111 diesel buses, 92 hybrid electric, and 12 all electric. In our 5-year plan to prioritize replacement, the oldest 62 buses in the fleet. And then we are looking to be fully deployed by 2025. The composition of the fleet at that time will be 49 diesel, 92 hybrid electric, and 68 all electric.
And you know that our MPO has partnered very closely with our transit provider to provide funding for purchasing new buses. We would never own a bus, but we have money like, we had mentioned, and I know Hillsborough TPO, they also partner with HART, I believe, on some transit capital needs as well. All right, what about mitigation banking? Does anyone here work with mitigation banking?
We do. The Environmental Protection Commission, we actually they have to come to us to they have to go to a bank and give us a permit for mitigation. Dessa can talk to it more. And also we do water quality monitoring. So we have the longest running data in the country for water quality data within Hillsborough County with the tributary and Tampa Bay. The estuary program uses much of our data. But Jeff Sims is also on the line. He's in our air division. So we have over 14 air monitoring stations where we monitor for carbon monoxide, lead, nitrogen oxides, ozone, particulate matter, and sulfur dioxide. So that's also continuous monitoring. It gets uploaded to go to the EPA. So every hour on the hour, that data is available. So, but Dessa, you want to talk about the mitigation? We also do seawalls and living shorelines and things like that, mangrove trimming. The port also does some seawalls and those type of things as well. But Dessa?
Yeah, so sorry, maybe I didn't chime up. I misunderstood the question. Because we don't work like for mitigation banks, but we do require after authorization is given that your impact meets reasonable use, then we do require that wetland impact is offset using either on-site creation of wetlands or purchase from a wetland mitigation bank. So my understanding is that there is very limited availability within at least Hillsborough County. And I know people are able to reserve credits now as new banks are about to come online, but that is certainly a limiting factor at the moment.
And then given the ability to mitigate on-site, how successful are you all seeing on-site mitigation? Like, do those wetlands last for any length of time?
They do. We did a whole study with the EPA probably 7 years ago. Obviously, when they're smaller in size, anything like under, and Dessa could tell you, probably under half an acre or an acre. It's all about the hydrologic connection. They have to stay hydrated, obviously. But yeah, we have a lot of success. And for the agency, any mitigation that can be bought in the area or created on site is valuable because wading birds only travel 25 miles. So if you have to buy in an adjoining county, it's really an issue for wildlife.
Can you define mitigation banking? I know.
Went to one of these too.
Well, we don't run mitigation banking, but mitigation banking is where you buy credits. So if, depending on the type of credit, is it a hardwood? Is it a mangrove? And people create banks with these types of ecosystems in there. And you can impact and buy a credit rather than create the mitigation on site.
So private development can
Correct.
destroy or adversely affect a wetland, and then they can pay money to someone who is restoring or creating or protecting those same types of wetlands, but in a different location.
But on site or close to the area being impacted is always the best.
I just want to kind of jump in too in this, the importance of the hydrologic connection. What we do find is that a lot of these areas, when the hydrology is really altered, you'll see like a herbaceous or like a marshy wetland transition into a forested hardwood wetland. And so we sort of lose certain types of wetlands because you can't maintain things like fire in the area. And the idea of hydrology is something that's really important. The way that the water is flowing. And so projects to restore hydrology are something that's really important, and it's like a big bang for your buck kind of restoration activity, because you can make a small modification like a ditch block or something like that, and it can restore a large number of acres in response. So if you have things like a shortage of mitigation banks, but you have public sector partners or these areas where you can make a small investment to have a big impact on improving these natural resources, it's a good strategy to go forward with. And that same thing is true both in the watershed as well as in the bay proper. So things like the Ginger Creighton Bridge, the at-grade bridge on the eastern side of the Courtney Campbell. We would love to see more of those bridges on the remaining causeways, particularly on the western side of Tampa Bay, of Old Tampa Bay. We think that there's a lot of opportunity for the department to maintain their own sort of credit system for restoration projects there, and not just rely on one of those causeway modifications.
So the last time we held this workshop, we talked about mitigation banks for mangroves, and the person that was there, who's not here, so I can say it this time, said that basically if you destroy a mangrove, you can mitigate it anywhere because a fish can swim, hundreds and hundreds of miles. But what I'm hearing is fish aren't the only consideration. Wading birds are also a challenge, and they don't travel as far. So that was not the correct response last time.
Not for the birds anyway.
Okay, that's good to know. And then you said Hillsborough has 14 monitoring sites.
We do, and there's networks. Pinellas County has a network as well. I mean, so we all counties are monitoring for the 7 constituents. Some have more robust, obviously the urban ones, Jacksonville, Miami, Tampa. We're going to have more of an extensive, robust monitoring, but Pinellas County has monitors as well.
That's what I was going to turn to. Sheila, what's the monitoring program for air quality look like in Pinellas?
We have 7 right now. And
And
we
is that-
monitor the same criteria pollutants.
Some of them are NADP sites. So there's really valuable data, but it's not participating in this one program that's important for nitrogen load estimation.
Okay, that's good. And Sheila, does that include the one at Lake Sawgrass? I thought that one was slightly different than the others.
Yeah, well, each station has its own equipment monitoring for different criteria pollutants. We have a near road site that monitors black carbon that's near I-275 that we don't have that at any other location. So, yeah, it varies.
So are there any ideas that you all have in the room to better protect wildlife through transportation projects? Clearly, our area is not getting more rural. So what ideas do you all have for that?
I really wish Carlton Ward were here because he's the guru. So if we can find a way to get you with Carlton Ward, he would tell you after tracking bear and cougar and everything, basically where it would benefit for crossings. I mean, obviously you have to get them from one side of the street to the other side of the street.
Crossings and maintaining and identifying those green spaces to retain, really prioritize to protect as corridors, are actually even redesigning and increasing those green spaces for corridors.
Also creating transportation routes for more alternative transportation types that are going to help people feel welcome and safe using alternative transportation. We're seeing, a huge rise in e-bikes and whatnot. And we want to encourage the community to be using those modes of transportation more, but we also have to keep them safe while doing so.
There's a lot of work with the Greenway Foundation and DEP, and of course, Sun Trail with underpasses that are both wildlife and transportation as well. So there's a lot of work being done on those projects as well. Several have been done by DOT. There's a key one just a little bit north of here that's part of that wildlife corridor and that's the Denellen one as well. So there's been, because of the new Sun Trail legislation, there's a lot of collaboration going on with several different groups, including the Greenways Foundation, working with everybody on presenting wildlife underpasses as a great alternative for moving animals and people, and they work very well together. Contrary to past beliefs that they don't share well, but that's not true according to the studies that have been done already. So that's been work the last 6 months.
I don't want to denigrate the work of the Florida Wildlife Corridor, but they do take this area and pretty much wear a blank spot on much of their map, at least like in the Tampa Bay proper area. And so I would just, again, encourage you to look at the Habitat Master Plan, which essentially identifies those corridors here in our region. We're not a blank spot. There's lots of opportunities for connectivity, particularly through Pasco and Hillsborough counties. So that Habitat Master Plan will help you where the Florida Wildlife Corridor maybe won't in this area, but don't write us off.
Is it on the RPC's website?
It's on the Estuary Programs website. Yes.
Might be some comments. Yeah, I was just gonna say, we have a couple comments from online.
Yeah.
So Alexandra Ryman from Pinellas, her first comment says incorporating roadside vegetation. I believe that was for your last question. And then she also added, Pinellas County has a tree mitigation program, allocating funds to plant trees within impacted watersheds if trees are affected during county projects. And
You know a lot about that.
then we had a comment from Ross Dickerson, I believe he's from Hillsborough. That says we do not have a mitigation banks on Hillsborough County preserves, but we do offer the ability to mitigate impacted wetlands on our properties. As Maya said, restoring wetlands on public lands usually has a bigger benefit than buying mitigation credits at a bank. Many of Hillsborough County's departments prefer to mitigate on public lands because it is cheaper.
Okay. That's a great question. So one of the things we do is we have in Pinellas County, we hold the county's capital improvements to the same level as they do commercial development, right? So if they impact trees in public spaces and the like, that we mitigate by planting with those projects funds. But is that idea of, those public spaces actually being a mitigation bank, that those rights of way where we could plant street trees to improve our communities, otherwise that they could be a mitigation bank in themselves. They would have a time period though. I mean, that's, I don't think any street tree planting anywhere is going to be guaranteed for maybe the longevity that mitigation banks are typically expected to do. But that might be an ideal location to do.
That's a good point. And how successful do you find the tree mitigation for the public works projects?
It works. It's challenging. It's still a fairly new program. The largest or the biggest barrier is being able to mitigate, like we would with any other kind of impact nearby or back on the project itself. So often, as with all transportation projects, we end up increasing the impervious surface space and the area to plant trees back is reduced typically. So often I'm looking for those areas that are not planned for future development or have some existing green space left where we can actually incorporate trees in. So one of our biggest issues is trying to get design early to incorporate green space so we can retain trees in that newly developed, newly saved area.
And the same thing that Carolyn says for trees applies to wetlands within Pinellas County Public Works.
So is then like the tree replacement, is it like, you know, an oak tree for 10 crepe myrtles? Or, I mean, is there some kind of parity when it comes to the type of tree?
Right, yeah, well, of course, we're often limited by those clear zone restrictions and or internal development guidelines based on how close we can plant to fixed infrastructure. We typically try to plant primarily native. We do prioritize canopy trees over that. So yes, if we're removing those crepe myrtles, we're going to prioritize planting larger canopy replacement rather than something that's going to be a smaller tree. But again, that it's all the factor of how adjacent that is to roadways and the like. All of those factors are in consideration.
And we just completed our urban heat island study within Palm River. And so one of the things is we're linking that, of course, to health issues within those areas where people are walking and biking. And so incorporation of trees, and we're trying to identify some locations now through those areas. So I think as you see roadway projects, either roadways being improved or widened or whatever the case might be, the incorporation of replanting of trees and reducing the removal of trees is extremely helpful, especially in those areas when we're expanding that urban heat island study through to other areas, primarily our low to moderate income areas.
So Ross Dickerson has contributed again. He said, we're also working on a gopher tortoise mitigation bank. Manatee County and Pasco already have tortoise banks available for public projects.
Anyone here work with gopher tortoise mitigation? You do, okay.
I did. Not anymore, not currently.
Do you have any insights into that? Like how difficult is that to manage? And
It depends on which type of permit you're looking for. I'd let Ross speak more on it, but since he's not here. So there's it's pretty difficult for what he's talking about, but there's also the WAIF, but you don't necessarily want the WAIF because by that point it's too late. But there is an opportunity for counties to introduce that on their properties and yeah, it can be pretty difficult.
I just remember an anecdote a few years ago when they were building the Tri-County Trail from Pinellas to Pasco. Every time they moved the gopher tortoises, some came back. And it was a constant.
Well, and you do have to incorporate the silt fence for the acreage required for the number of tortoises you plan on taking. And you have to maintain that silt fence for, I believe it's at least 6 months after you receive the last tortoise. And I don't know if anybody else here has ever maintained silt fence for 6 months, but it is not fun at all. And I mean, you're talking a lot of acreage of silt fence.
Other MPO friends have questions? It's not necessarily my show. So. Yes, sir.
I have a question. So I'm here because our office focuses on, I think shoreline change is probably the easiest reference point, but basically the landscape change through time. And if I think about the next storm or the next 100 storms and roadways, and I think maybe the analogy is sand transport corridors, and how do you consider that with building coastal roads? I think the Barrier Island roads are the most important ones to consider. And, you know, they can either be eroded by some storms or buried by some storms. And what do you do with both those situations? And particularly if they're buried, which way should you push that sand? Back into the ocean or somewhere else? Because that can be feeding other ecological systems for long-term sort of keeping up with sea level rise.
Yeah, and that's an excellent question, which I don't think anyone has an answer for at this point. I think at this point, everyone's just trying to play catch up on that. I mean, I've heard the arguments of, oh, all the roads should be raised. Being a former Shore Acres resident, if anyone's familiar with St. Petersburg, you raise the roads, you're just going to flood all the properties. So I still think that we're still playing catch up on that and trying to figure out the best way to do it. With our current long range transportation plans, we did look at a number of major corridors that could be inundated. And we built in kind of a cost inflation factor to assume that some of those roads would have to be raised a bit, but they weren't neighborhood streets. It was like Yandy Boulevard, I-275, increasing the depth of the roadway base so that there wasn't any kind of erosion, or at least minimal erosion in the event of inundation. So we're looking at those for our major roads. When it comes to the neighborhood roads, I don't want to pass the buck, but I say we'd probably just give it to the local governments to figure out and come up with a plan with, that they're comfortable with politically and environmentally. But for the major roads, we know that those will still probably be necessary going forward. So those we're looking to harden. And it's through conversations like today, we want to make sure that we inflate those cost factors so that when, say, the department or the county goes to build those roads, it's already been built in and assumed.
So I've had some interesting conversations with engineers about hardening causeways in particular. So you're talking about elevating an existing causeway rather than building an alternative like lengthening the bridge. And right now the state has a policy of fortifying causeways after we saw what Ian did down at Sanibel Island. But some of the engineers that I've talked to are like, they've said causeways are designed to fail so that you don't have to repair the entire bridge. And so if we now have a policy of going in and fortifying the part of the infrastructure that is supposed to be the weak spot so that you don't lose everything, that's just adding more money onto bad. And it's creating more of these barriers to things that, you know, we don't want to be working against, things that are impairing water quality. So I think we ought to have a better idea rather than just having a cost inflation, understand what are the adaptation and resilience policies that are going to get us the outcomes we want, because just fortifying these causeways in these low-lying areas probably isn't the right answer, and certainly not doing it with more gray infrastructure. So
no, that's an excellent point. And for now, I mean, once projects get into design, I think some of those bigger choices are made. But knowing that going into it, we can do things on the front end to make sure that that's being accounted for.
when they get into the like PD&E phase and you're in the design phase, a lot of that depends on the alternatives that are being evaluated. And my experience here is that our world of alternatives is not big enough. And so, you know, having some flexibility to add different alternatives or make sure that environmental interests are included in the defining of what some of the alternatives to be analyzed are would be really beneficial. Understand that you're not always going to pick the, you know, most environmentally friendly. It might not be cost efficient or whatever. But that just defining the world of alternatives, I don't think we've been creative enough in defining those and then evaluating them against some of the options that we've selected.
Okay, that's a really good point.
A question to the point that she's making is, it sounds like, you know, we're always looking at these like cost alternatives. Are we also looking at that long-term resiliency and understanding that the alternative may be the most expensive choice to be the most resilient choice? Is that happening?
It's happening just yet. No, but that's also why this is fantastic that we're having this conversation today so that we can hopefully work together to make that change going forward. Anyone else have any other thoughts?
Question or kind of thought. So we've talked a little bit about trees and how important certain trees are, and also alternative transportation. I'd like to see if anyone has any thoughts or follow up on how do we ensure that's incorporated as we work on things? Is it considering policies at this high level? Like our long range transportation plans are very high level in a lot of our goals and policies. Or if there are other strategies or things we should be considering as we do transportation planning, knowing that MPOs and kind of our role is not an operator or implementer, to encourage the use of trees and shade and all of these other things with heat islands and safe alternative transportation that either you've had experience with or you could recommend to us, or kind of think about how do we do this, because our role is different than the designer role or something like that. So how do we take the good things that we're talking about and think about setting it up so that the people who are designing or reviewing plans feel like they can say, you know, this supports that, or we have a place to speak from?
Do you provide a focus, like a long range goal that, you know, you are looking for alternative transportation sources? So the idea is that we diet down, you know, that our focus for the future is reducing, you know, vehicle use and increasing green space around our transportation corridors, increasing opportunities for alternative transportation, whether it be like mass transit or whether it be personal transit. If that's the long range goal, our long range goal is to reduce that amount of impervious surface that impacts our bay throughout the entire Tampa Bay region. that would, I mean, that's like the most simplest beginning level, I think, and then that could be like dialed in further.
Something also, this might be a very low grade question, but is that data available to you all? Are you looking at it as you are creating these things as far as like urban tree canopy, GIS data points, or social vulnerability indices, that kind of thing?
We, at the Hillsborough TPO, we did do a needs assessment for equity. And we focused on certain areas of Hillsborough County. We had a number of factors we looked at. One of them was shade. Some of them were access to transit or other things. So it is something we looked at certain areas that are our most vulnerable populations. It's the first time that we've done that in this way, but I think that is something that we definitely would be interested in and kind of seeing how do we continue those efforts.
So would it be useful for us to bring, you had asked for methods that we use that we have seen succeed. So would it be useful for us to bring examples of how to connect that data to real world implementation and transportation? Is that what you're requesting?
I think that would be very helpful. And that'd be very helpful if you have examples here or from elsewhere or other places, because that helps us tell the story and connect the dots. And I think that's a big part of what we do with our long range transportation plans is tell the story of what our needs are and why. And that helps us as we prioritize projects to say, this is how we can prioritize things if this is a value.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And that priority piece is really key because we don't build anything. And I'm not going to turn around and go to, Pinellas County and say, hey, here's a great project. You need to do it this way, because then they'll laugh at me and kick me out. But when it comes to, any ways that we can kind of help incentivize good work. And if we're going to fund a project, what are some of the criteria points that we want to make sure that the local government that's building the project meet before we say, okay, fine, here's, the millions of dollars to go towards that. I think that's what's really important for us as MPOs, given that we don't really have that level of control.
Incentivizing things like regional stormwater treatment facilities in the old Tampa Bay drainage basins, I do think would be beneficial. And if transportation projects can catalyze that and the plan can emphasize it, that Bay segment is not meeting its water quality criteria. And it's mostly coming from urban stormwater more than any other source. So prioritizing those geographic locations, those places where we're not meeting a total maximum daily load, that would be helpful.
You have a comment. It was, I'm sorry. I just want to throw it in.
What Maya's saying, that one of the barriers we find in the department is the regulatory framework. So a lot of times and in special cases we have, like with Virginia Creighton Bridge, have, taken it upon ourselves to prioritize. Oftentimes the priorities like Maya's talking about aren't reflected in the current stormwater rule. And so we're boxed in by that. And so even if we would say want to do something that's regionally significant, if the project's not located in the right place, or if that project doesn't provide the correct treatment for our project, then we're not able to do it.
We got to find a way to support the department to, get flexibility for these kinds of things that we want to see together so that we can remove that barrier, I think. Yeah, we got to help you on that.
And I'm not an engineer, but how strongly does, clear zone like play into all this, having to clear cut all the trees within a certain, number of feet of the right of way?
I'm not quite sure what you mean, but basically the clearing is done for whatever's required to build the road in that case. Or if you're a mall or a development, sometimes there's different priorities, but for us, we don't clear more than we have to build the road. There's a cost associated with clearing, right? And not just environmental, but monetarily, that incentivizes us to not do more than we need to. In some cases, there is some flexibility built in there. Like, for example, when they did the intersection at I-75 and 050 in Brooksville, There, unfortunately, there's some very large pond sites needed just because of the way the hydrology works up there. You know, it's real flashy. But there was some stands of trees that were included in clearing zones, but ended up being, we were able to leave them there, remain. And part of that was because of the way the contracts work. So a design build versus an in-house push button versus design bid build. In that case, the incentive was on the contractor to say, hey, we don't need to go out here. It saves them money by not doing it. And they bring those ideas to the department and we review it. And as long as it meets like safety requirements and other things, we can implement that.
Hey Chelsea, this is Cheryl. So sometimes Cheryl Stack, City of St. Pete. So sometimes I think we've seen where contractors will take out a few more trees if it makes it easier for them to construct the project in a more timely manner or kind of keep it more on schedule. So sometimes they'll sacrifice some of that landscaping, maybe a little bit more than what they need to. So I know we had a recent discussion with FDOT District 7 about particularly I-275. And trying to make sure that the construction specifications were written to make sure that, you know, the contractor is not incentivized to take out more than is necessary in order to speed up the construction of a particular project. If that, you know, if it's going to take out trees that are quality trees for kind of having environmental benefits and those kinds of things. So I just would kind of put that out there as well, as that sometimes we see it as a means of speeding up the construction a little bit. Yeah.
Hey, Cheryl.
I did. I was thinking because we were talking about air pollution, air quality issues as well as I don't know whether or not the MPOs have any. Again, you know, the idea that speaking from St. Pete, incentivizing or asking the FDOT to incentivize their subs to have certain practices when they do. With the recent expressway, the clearing that was done in Pinellas County for that area, they open burned that material for, I think, 6 months right there beside the airport and I drove through that across the bridge for, I felt like 6 months or so along that lines. Even incentivizing that kind of thing too, not to do that in the midst of urban centers or find alternative ways to compost, use that. And I do know they do on some projects, they actually compost on site and then reutilize that in the landscaping that's repaired in these new transportation corridors. But I don't know if that's something as well, the idea of incentivizing or giving guidelines, creating some kind of overarching guidelines that would make all of their projects a little more environmentally conscious.
I certainly don't speak for the department, and I don't want to say that I do. I speak for my office of one. There's certainly the two things I would say about that. One is that the department does have quite an extensive design manual, which most municipalities here utilize because you guys don't have the resources to have to develop those kind of things. And so, you know, if there's a change that could be made, a lot of times, like I'm thinking of landscaping, I don't know necessarily disposal and burning, but, you know, like, for example, it was updated a few years back to incentivize or prioritize native species over ornamental and non-natives. So there are changes that can be done in that way that govern, because basically what it comes down to is the contractor, once they have the job, it's their job. And so we're then governed not by anything that we didn't include up to that point by the contract and agreement between two. And so for burn piles, that's allowed by the state. So I'm not even sure that would be appropriate for DOT to do that. That would be more like that would be more DP that you would need to not allow that, but maybe say in urban areas or versus not. And that would be that's not say DOT couldn't look at that like through the specs I was saying, but obviously the second part of that is probably the agency that regulates that, which is not us.
Maybe we can't bring it up to them though. So.
Right, and that's how the changes get made, right? Yeah.
Caitlin, was there a comment online?
Yes, so Christy Booth from FWC has a couple really good comments. Christy, if you would like to just unmute yourself, you can, or I can read your comments, whatever you prefer.
Either way, it's fine. I can, I guess, read kind of what I had said. Well, basically, FWC is an ETAT member with DOT's, ETDM program that I know you guys are aware of, or I mean, the MPOs are aware of. I'm not sure if everyone in the room is aware of. So FWC does look at a lot of the projects and permits that DOT does, depending on the size and complexity of it, depends on how much involvement we have. So we do look for the considerations of impacts to listed species, opportunities for wildlife crossings. And then we have another part of our group that looks at, for example, your MPOs, comp plans and LRTPs, and they review that with an eye for developments and consideration to wildlife impacts. So there's kind of two groups in our department that do have some kind of interaction with you guys. And so for like, I work with Joel there in District 7. And, we do look at, and we know that DOT does look at, for each project, they has, they have to go through the NEPA process and considerations for all the species, state and federal listed. They do surveys, and a lot of time they do hire, consultant contractors that are fully aware of looking for wildlife trails, for example, to see if there are crossings. They do GIS analysis. And so if there's like a bridge considered in a project, they look at ways to, if it's a new bridge, to design it with shelving or the like, whatever to help with wildlife crossings. Or if there's a project that exists and they might need a rehab like a bridge, and they know that it's been used by wildlife, they can even go back and kind of retrofit it to assist with the crossings of various species, depending on what they are that they've seen. And as I was mentioning, your LRTPs and your comp plans, you do have usually sections in there that you can provide guidance on wildlife, among other things. And some other ideas that we may suggest with DOT projects, such as decreasing right-of-way needs, if that's possible, if they can avoid impacts of certain wetlands, or, for example, like a bird rookery, we provide some guidance on saying, no, don't use that alignment, use this other alignment that will be less impactive. So there are some agencies and other people out there that are helping guide and decrease these wildlife impacts to better protect them in our ever-changing and developing world right now as we see it. There's a lot of special construction methodologies that can be used as well. And that's on down the line in the process of a project. And you guys basically are at the very beginning of this process, which I was mentioning that, you do your own public outreach, you have your own meetings, seeking guidance by, by the people living within your jurisdiction. They can help provide comments and set your priority list as to what they want to see done. Just, for example, that way you guys can guide the funding that you're going to seek, the listing of your projects with DOT to work in those ways that do help with environmentally sensitive and better friendly projects, like you were saying, like helping like the water quality. I know lots of times DOT does projects that does help make the water quality better in the area through some of their drainage treatment systems. And then also, you guys, if you see any opportunities, you are the catalyst, and you are a way to get things, I guess, like I was saying, spark planted in the DOTs. Well, your priority list becomes their priority list. So, I mean, all you have to do is speak up as you can through your process. That's about it. I think I hit all the highlights.
Thank you, Christy.
We do have another comment from Jeff Sims. He just said he agrees on the open burning comment. It is permitted in Hillsborough County and not normally used, but any incentives not to do burn should be encouraged.
Any other online comments?
Nope, that's it for online.
Right, did anyone in the audience have any more questions, comments, concerns? Yes, sir.
I was just gonna bring up, kind of going back to Sarah's comment. So I think it's, we as a county, the cities, we can have goals, policies and objectives in our comprehensive plan that says we ought to do, that we encourage and we, try to promote these type of design considerations and that type of thing. So whenever we get a DOT project comes through, we try to encourage and promote, all of those good things. I think there seems to be a tendency of, similar to another comment that we heard, that you get a project that comes through and it's always the most expedient way, the cost effective way, the cheapest way, without putting forward any consideration for, if you add a certain, because you've added trees or you've done certain things to a project, you've now increased the cost by 10%. And oh my gosh. And so let's not do that. And so that just seems to be the frustrating part because as a county, we try to encourage and we try to, but sometimes that just doesn't get done. And so I think, as a planner, I like seeing stuff in policy form. I mean, I'm sure they do too. I mean, we like seeing things in, written down so we can say, no, you got to do it this way because this has been found to, be better and more beneficial for the environment, the community, and all of those type of things. So instead of, having the same type of design or whatever, that doesn't necessarily do all of those good things. So, I mean, I don't know. I mean, it's more of just a comment. It's not necessarily a solution, except for the fact that if we had if all of us, city, counties, DOT, everyone has policies in place that say, okay, this is what you've got to do because we're trying to accomplish these goals. That makes it a little more, there's no way around it unless you meet these criteria, whatever the case might be.
As you're talking, I'm thinking of a project that's going on in Pinellas right now, and FDOT says this is what we're going to build. And one of our cities came back and said, well, we really want this. So FDOT said, fine, we'll do it for you, but you have to pay for that increment of costs above it. So I think that DOT would be a willing partner. And maybe that's something that us as MPOs can work with the local governments on is, can we all maybe set aside a portion of our funds to be able to fund that increment that goes above and beyond the state's minimum requirements that they may continue to push through because, I mean, they have their own budget as well. So
I'm sure that would probably help. I mean, it's just wind up seeing that, it's like the a McDonald's restaurant. Anytime they build the same prototype. Every time they build the same one. It doesn't always work in all cases. Same thing with roadway projects or any type of other projects. So, anyway.
I'd encourage you not just to include local governments on that too, but the federal government, because you have a question on there about untapped opportunities. One of the things that I think about is the NOAA habitat restoration dollars. What fish passage looks like in the state of Florida is largely these kind of causeway, road crossing, culverts, those kinds of things. Florida has not been successful at pulling down very much, if any, federal funds for fish passage. And that's because we don't know how to pitch our projects. And so basically the Pacific Northwest and New England states are getting all of that money. And there's lots of other examples of that kind of thing where we could be a conduit to federal resources to bridge that gap to make a project look like everybody wants it to.
I comment on that because the my immediate thought of this is that those less affluent communities and or smaller communities that might not have staffing and resources or funds to do that, they are end up in a disadvantage in those situations. Great. We don't want you to do that. And they're like, well, yeah, you can pay this extra. We don't have that extra, but the next community that is more affluent does. So we'd end up, I think, kind of creating some disparities there.
Good, but there's also an opportunity, I think, for the MPOs, since we work countywide and we try to bring everyone together. And we also have ability to tap into some federal dollars. Maybe that's where we're able to step in and kind of help bridge that gap.
Can I add to that? I think it's important to understand if you're going for federal dollars, you have to show some sort of NEPA compliance as well. So understanding that at the beginning, then it opens up more opportunities for grants, not just, I mean, there's like FEMA, there's all sorts of grants that you can go after, but you have to know that from the beginning. So you're not trying to backpedal after you got the project under construction.
I think I saw another comment come in.
Yeah. Yeah, Alexandra had a good comment. She said, when considering planting vegetation, some constraints are operation and maintenance costs. It's not just the upfront costs.
That's true. Our partners at FDOT will plant anything we want them to, but they won't take care of it.
Yes.
It's not a dig on you.
Had some good experience with that.
I have kind of an obvious comment, but I just want to make it clear or said that when like designing a project, right, I think the savings on costs are really dependent on avoidance and minimization of wetland impacts because wetland mitigation is so expensive. So I understand there's a lot of other considerations when designing roadway plans, but avoiding the wetlands as much as possible or impacting, some of those more upland cut features or lower quality features are going to be much cheaper in the long run. Although it might be convenient to impact, that specific wetland, the cost in the long run, expensive.
Interesting comment there about lower quality and upland having less value than wetland. And when we're talking about transportation, we're talking about wildlife corridor and the like, that those are, should be on.
Well, they are, at least in EPC's rule, a wetland is a wetland, period. Like, we don't play favorites, but when calculating for what the mitigation would be, it's going to be less. Because the function is less than like a higher quality wetland.
This is all really great discussion, which brings us to kind of our next point. After today, we're all going to kind of go back to our respective offices and just get right back to work. What's the best way to keep you all engaged? So in the future, we don't have to wait another 5 years to do this, but if we have a project coming up and we have questions, how should we best keep you engaged as our projects move forward and become more clearly defined? I know some of you may be members on your MPO's technical committee. Some of you may follow them on social media and see when plans and programs come out. Do you all feel like you're engaged enough in the transportation process, or do you feel blindsided when projects come up and you didn't know that they were coming?
I would extend to you the Habitat Restoration Consortium. That's a working group that we convene at the Tampa Bay Estuary Program. It includes some of the folks in the room here, as well as a whole lot of other folks, particularly those that are influential in mitigation banking and large-scale habitat restoration. That would be a good place as you have more firm things to present to them and get feedback there.
And we all have websites, so maybe there's a way we can link to your information through our website. We have an individual, Jeff Sims, who comes to your MPO meetings, but all of the, whether it's living shorelines and the value of that. I mean, you talk about hardening surfaces, but if you look after Katrina, every hardened surface was gone. So sometimes having a combination of things, but just whether it's the fish connectivity or flushing issues, there's so many different issues that everyone's mentioning. And so whether there's presentations to the MPO from individuals here, and then those can be put onto our own websites. It's all about getting the information out, I think.
I will also say it's a two-way street. So if this will move. This is contact information for at least one of us from each of the MPOs in the region. If anything comes up in your conversations that you feel you'd like to reach out to the MPOs for, please reach out to one of us, depending on whatever county you're in. If you get the wrong county, we'll reroute you, not a problem. And then also today, there's an online portal. Caitlin, would you mind putting that link in the chat? The online portal? So after today, if you go back to your office and you kind of want to go back in and look at the maps and the projects that we have placed around the room, that portal will be up for, Sarah, is it a week?
The 28th.
Till the 28th. We're accepting comments online on the various projects and plans. So I guess at this point, if no one has any other questions, I'd ask, oh, you have a question? Dan.
Sorry. I know it takes a little bit of effort to maintain, but have we thought about doing like a listserv for this group?
Is there a desire to have a listserv for this group? I see nothing.
Yes.
So we have everyone that's here, everyone that's online, and then I think just a couple others that didn't respond. So we can add everyone to a listserv, and then if you would like to be removed, of course, you're welcome to do that.
Chelsea, I have not seen the sign-in sheet, by the way.
Did the sign-in sheet get lost? Oh, Tania's hoarding it. All right, please make sure that you sign in so that we know that you were here. I think another question came in online, Caitlin.
Yeah. So Cassie Cordova from Clearwater said, I would suggest keeping Pinellas Sustainability and Resiliency Network in the loop. We are a group of the sustainability staff in Pinellas County.
Perfect.
And then Alexandra Ryman from Pinellas said leveraging the Tampa Bay Regional Planning Council as well.
All right, excellent. We'll do those. Yes, sir.
So for me, from the science community, I think, engagement is filling gaps. And so how do you announce what information you're missing? It could be total blank spot or uncertainties that are so large that essentially the information is useless. But where is it that you expose what it is you don't know?
Question. I don't know. And I will say that we're also still trying to get better at it internally. So every year, each of the MPOs, we adopt a list of priority projects that we plan to advance for funding. And that's probably the closest to where that gap needs to be identified because it's not in design yet. It hasn't been funded. It's still a little bit conceptual. So I would say probably each May when the MPOs adopt their priorities, that's like the best chance to get that snapshot of what projects are going to be coming soon. And if there are any new ones. And that's probably where you need to start thinking, okay, what do we need to start thinking about? What are the parameters? What are the impacts? What are the red flags at that level?
For me, the value of that is we're a national program paid by your tax dollars. And so we have the ability to steer our priority research efforts in directions that have more useful impact. That's why I'm here wondering, do we have stuff that's useful or not? And we can change that.
Definitely go back and give that some thought. Thank you for that. And which agency were you with again?
Geological survey. So, federal.
Yeah. What else? All right, so we've got the counties broken into corridors. Sarah's over here with Hillsborough. Caitlin's over here with Pinellas. Tinny and Scott back there with Pinellas, Pasco, sorry. And Rob, do you want to go back to Hernando Citrus? And if you guys can maybe, whatever county interests you or is your area of expertise, please go to it. We have a series of maps to talk with you a little bit more about what those projects look like and the context of the county they're in. For all of our online folks, Caitlin, I believe, has put the link in the chat to the online portal, and we ask that you please go there and leave your comments. And then if you have any questions after today, our contact information is on the screen. We look forward to hearing from you.
The big maps in the back as well that show all the counties together.
Perfect. Yep, big regional
There
maps.
are regional ones, and not banned, but you can look at them all together.
All right, thank you so much. And if you're dipping out, then thank you for joining us today.
Okay. Thank you. How are you doing?
Awesome.
So I realized those two days.
That's okay.
I saw